I'm just looking at my big stack here, and I had a really, really good month. I had a cracking reading month. A lot of stuff here I'm excited to talk about. A lot of it I already have, or I'm about to. And as always, I'm just going to go from the top and work my way down, so this is not in chronological order, because big stacks are heavy and scary. First up is The Hierarchies by Roz Anderson, an indie sci-fi novel, and it was the subject of my previous video. If you want to go watch that, you can learn more about it. This book is excellent. It's a daring thing to try to reapproach the concept of machine learning, artificial intelligence, cognition, all things that have been explored in the genre of science fiction for decades now. So many great science fiction authors and filmmakers have talked about the idea of intelligence, self-awareness, learning, these kinds of concepts. And this book manages to do it in a fresh new way, while also being a fresh new take on contemporary feminism. This is a book about a sex robot. She is assigned to a specific man who has custom ordered her. He has a wife who's pregnant and she gives birth early in the novel. She knows the robot exists, but Sylvie has to stay upstairs in the attic, and her husband comes along and asks for his needs to be met. Sometimes they're sexual, other times they might be intellectual. The two of them might play chess together or just have a chat about things. Sylvie has the capacity to learn and grow, and we follow her on that journey as she goes. There are a lot of interesting twists and turns when it comes to what happens to her, and you can learn more if you watch my full video on it. But this is a book that is incredibly feminist and also philosophical when it comes to the concept of learning and that age-old concept of consciousness. What is consciousness? Are we alive? Do we have a soul? Blah, 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 blah. But as I said, it does so in a new, interesting way, while having a fresh take on feminism itself in some ways, which I find also very, very refreshing. This is a refreshing piece of science fiction that I really, really enjoyed. Next up is The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. I've already done a video on this, you can go watch it. M.R. Carey turns out to be Mike Carey, one of my favourite comic book writers from when I was younger. He wrote a comic called The Unwritten, which is absolutely incredible, and this was his debut novel decades after writing so many incredible comics. This has also been adapted into a film, which I haven't seen, and he has a brand new book coming out in March that I'm going to be reviewing. And it's a big sci-fi epic. The Girl with All the Gifts is a post-apocalyptic story, and on the face of it, it doesn't do much new with that concept. It's very formulaic until you really dig into what it's actually about, the way that it explores characters and relationships, and what humanity actually is, what humanity means, what humanity does, how it serves the world. It's a really fascinating question to pose, and the way that it goes about answering those questions is really interesting. Our protagonist is a young girl around the age of 10 called Melanie, who lives in a bunker on a military base in a post-apocalyptic England that has been ravaged by zombie-like creatures, and there's so few of us left. But Melanie is a test subject because she's been infected, and yet she doesn't behave like all the other zombies. Not entirely. She has the capacity to become ravenous and feral in certain situations, but for the most part, she is a kind, understanding, empathetic, intelligent young girl, and so she's being experimented on. It's a really, really touching tale, and it takes us to some really, really interesting places in terms of morality and intelligence. I was pretty floored by this book. There is also a sequel, although I think it's a prequel, but it came after. Haven't read it yet, probably will, but I'm also really excited to review his upcoming book, Infinity Gate. Next is Two Sherpas. This is an Argentinian novel by Sebastián Martínez Daniel, and it was translated by Jennifer Croft, who is an amazing translator of Polish, Spanish, and possibly other stuff. Anyway, she's incredible. Again, I have reviewed this book. You can go watch the video review. It's on my channel. It was published by Charco Press, dear friends of mine, and they always publish incredible things. I say that time and time again because I need to make sure everyone's reading Charco Press books. This is fascinating. It is set in the modern day on Mount Everest. You've got a dead Englishman lying on the edge of a cliff. He plummeted about 30-40 feet and presumably died. And our titular two Sherpas are looking over the edge at his body. He fell to his death by accident, and the two of them are just looking down. And they exchange about 10 lines of dialogue throughout the entire novel, trying to decide what they do now. And the whole rest of the book is just flashbacks to their childhoods, learning about these two men. But it goes beyond that. We also get glimpses into the history of Sherpas, the history of Buddhism, concepts like colonialism and empire. We learn the perspectives of these two very different men when it comes to things like tourism, religion, work, family. And occasionally we flash back to the present moment, which is them looking down on a dead Englishman. This is a book that really explores colonialism and the damages that it has done throughout history across the planet. It really pokes at the British Empire in an almost tongue-in-cheek way. It makes fun of the patheticness of empire, especially the British Empire. I enjoyed how daring and literary it was, how it doesn't really have a consistent narrative. Every tiny short vignette of a chapter takes us to a different place, a different discussion, a different idea or concept. Loved it. Really extraordinary book. Okay, the next two books that I'm going to talk about are going to be the subject of my next video, and I'm so excited to talk about them. First up is Boulder by Eva Baltazar. This was translated from the Catalan by Julia Sanchez, and oh wow, this is a tiny little 100-page book. It is a fierce and punk lesbian novel, and I tore through it in a matter of hours, sitting in a cafe just pulling apart the pages as I read. Our protagonist is the titular Boulder. She's a flighty woman, presumably in her 30s. She's very hedonistic. She goes about life moving pretty often from job to job. She's a cook. And she says she's not a very good one. She's not a chef. She just takes cooking jobs. At the very beginning, she's working on a summer camp off the coast of Spain, I think, and she's the cook. Then she takes a job on a freighter. So she's on this ship, and she's just dishing up slop to the people working on this ship. They're off the coast of Chile, I think, when she meets a woman on board the ship who's a geologist named Samsa. Up until this point, Boulder has enjoyed her life just meeting women when she can and enjoying them while she can, but Samsa really takes Boulder's heart quickly, and the two of them end up moving to Reykjavik together. I'll stop here because I'm about to make a video on this book, but Boulder is a very punk novel. Everything is told just from Boulder's perspective, like a diary. There's no dialogue, it's just her thoughts and opinions as she falls in love, kind of against her own better judgment, moves to a place and settles down, which is not something she does, and even more things start to happen that she's not entirely happy or comfortable with, but she keeps doing it because she's in love. And you can tell how itchy and uncomfortable she is with her entire lot in life. I really loved this. I really did. I can't wait to talk about it in a new video. And the other book that I'll mention in that video is Love Me Tender by Constance Debray. This is translated from the French by Holly James, and it's kind of a similar book to Boulder. It's short, it's a sapphic novel, it's a woman in translation, and it's very punk and angry. It's based on the author's own life, and it tells the story of a woman named Constance, who in her 40s, after 20 years of marriage and raising a kid to the age of 8, realizes that she's gay. She separates herself from her husband, moves into a studio flat in Paris, and spends her days very hedonistically getting tattoos, going swimming, working out, reading a lot, writing a lot, and sleeping around with a bunch of women. She's having fun. But her husband is behaving in a very disgusting homophobic manner by weaponizing their child against her, and she's struggling to get any rights when it comes to visitation or custody. She's having a really rough time with it. And you're watching her pull herself apart at either side, trying to enjoy her new, gay, hedonistic freedom and trying to maintain a relationship with her son, in spite of the fact that it's getting really difficult because her son is being turned against her by her homophobic ex-husband. I can't wait to talk about both of these books. Absolutely incredible stuff. Here's another book that I recently reviewed and did a video on, called Memorial 29th of June. Now, in my review, I pronounced the author's name Tina Høeg, and I was told that was wrong. One Danish speaker told me that I just got it wrong, but didn't say how to actually say it. And another Danish speaker in my comments said it's pronounced Ho. Don't know if that's right. I assume they're right. Anyway, Memorial. This is another fascinating and experimentally written book. Despite how thick it is, it could actually be read in an afternoon, as I did, because it's really, really sparse. You've got a woman named Asta who has published one book pretty successfully and is trying to work on her second novel. 10 years ago, when she was at university, a boy that she knew, a friend of hers, tragically died. And now, a 10-year anniversary memorial for his death has been set up and she's been invited to it. And then what we get here is just a back and forth between her current life, her friendships, her work, and the time at university where she had all these friends and she had a potential romantic relationship with the guy who died, and we learn more about his death and the strange circumstances around it. It's not a murder mystery, but it's a character study with a death kind of at its center. And it's written in really, really sparse little lines, barely any punctuation. It feels empty. It looks empty when you read through it, and that's kind of beautiful. If you want to learn more, watch my full review. Here's a book I'm umming and eyeing over whether or not to do a full video on. I probably will. We'll see. I got this book on a whim. I was in Foyles on Charing Cross Road in central London, and I saw that it was out. I didn't know it was coming out. I should have. I didn't. This is a transgender memoir by Munro Bergdorf. It's called Transitional, and the concept of this book that makes it stand out amongst other queer memoirs is her argument that everyone transitions in one way or another. Transitioning is a part of life. And so this is a memoir that takes us through her childhood, her university years, and her 20s. But all the while, every aspect of the book has a theme, has a concept that we're following, and it's all linked to the idea of transitioning. All the while, she is transitioning in one way or another. First, before she realizes she's trans, she comes out as gay. Then she goes on transitioning through her life in terms of her mental health, in terms of the friends that she makes, the course she takes at university, the jobs that she gets. She grows and she changes and she evolves, as we all do, and these are all transitions, and she explores those in a really fun and satisfying thematic way. Munro Bergdorf is quite a legend when it comes to transgender activism and also black rights activism in the UK. As a mixed-race trans woman, she has a lot to say, she has a very, very important perspective, and Transitional is absolutely worth reading. I think I'll do a full video on it, we'll see. This is a poetry collection that my girlfriend bought, read, and enjoyed, and so then they gave it to me to read. It's called The Princess Saves Herself in this one by Amanda Lovelace. It's separated into 4 parts that kind of go through Lovelace's life. And I only really have one thing to say about this, and I feel a little bit bad about it, which is that I've never enjoyed the narrative that tragedy makes good artists. The idea that we can lead a tragic life and that will inspire great art. The whole Kurt Cobain thing. Depression, misery, alcoholism, they all lead to good art. I don't believe that's true. I think it's toxic and damaging. However, part 1 of this collection is really, really dark. It's about her childhood. It's about abuse. It's very driven by themes of feminism and inner strength, and it's a really, really powerful collection of poems. Then she finds a bit of happiness. She falls in love with a man, and the poems get a bit shit from there. The happier she is, the more she talks about love, the more it sounds cliched, and I got pretty bored. At the beginning, when she's angry, eager for change, eager for growth, talking about women's rights, and pain and misery, it was fueled and angry and fiery, and I liked it. And from there on, it just kind of gets gradually worse and worse the happier she gets. And I feel kind of bad about that. This is The Witch in the Well by Camilla Bruce. I just did a review of it, so you can go watch that if you want to learn more. It's a really, really brilliant dual narrative novel, and it tells the story of two women who used to be friends when they were kids. They're both now middle-aged, and they're both pretty stupid in their own ways. However, when the book begins, one of them's dead, and this dual narrative is actually set a year apart. We've got the present day with Kathy, who is alive, and people think maybe she had something to do with her ex-friend Elena's death, and Kathy is writing a diary publicly on her Facebook page to try to explain her innocence, even though that's a terrible idea and her lawyer begs her to stop doing it. And then we have Elena's story, which is written in a diary up until her death. We learn what she was up to, some weird things that she believes, a book that she's trying to write, and through both of these narratives we learn about their childhoods and the fact that they used to be friends as kids and then they fell out. And we're constantly going back and forth between perspectives. It's a book about the concept of he said, she said. My truth versus your truth. My narratives and memories versus yours. And I really, really, really enjoyed this one. And the titular Witch in the Well does factor into it, but I go into more detail in my video, so you can go watch that. This is one of the best memoirs I've ever read, and I'm not alone in saying that. This book has taken the whole world by storm. I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jeanette McCurdy is incredible. It's a very, very powerful memoir that's smartly written in the first person and present tense as McCurdy goes through her life and explores the very, very toxic and abusive relationship between her and her mother, which, at the time growing up, she didn't realize was toxic and dangerous and abusive because she had no context for it. And that adds an incredible layer of pain and tragedy to the book as you go through it. It's about her being a child actor in Hollywood and being forced into it by her mother. Go watch my full review, and also just go buy and read this if you haven't already. I'm Glad My Mum Died is a whirlwind. It's an incredible memoir, and I loved every page. One of my favourite horror authors is American author Grady Hendrix, and this is his newest novel. This was recommended to me by one of my patrons during the Patreon book club. At the time when she mentioned it, the book wasn't out, and then as soon as it hit the shelves in the UK, I grabbed a copy. And if you want to recommend me books that I will then talk about and we can discuss in a book club, join my Patreon, please. How to Sell a Haunted House is a curious book that is scary. It's a horror novel, but it is more importantly about the characters. The relationship between this brother-sister pair whose parents have died and now the two of them need to figure out what to do with the house. It's absolutely compelling. It's brilliant. You've got the sister who is successful. She moved out of their small town and went off to San Francisco. She's a single mother. She's very successful. She's proud of herself. And then her brother is kind of a pathetic mess who works as a bartender in their local town. He never moved out. He's perpetually single. And the two of them hate each other. And then as the book goes, we learn that the house, as the title spells out, is haunted. But who's it haunted by? Is it their parents? That seems a bit obvious. But you learn more as you go. And honestly, it's scary. It's really, really fun and camp in a lot of ways. It's pretty explosive in a Sam Raimi style of horror. But the characters and their relationships are so well written. And I have to give props to Grady Hendrix for the fact that he always writes women. He always writes female protagonists, and he always does it really, really well. I am a big fan of Laura Purcell, and this, I think, is her Gothic masterpiece. This is her 5th novel, I believe, The Whispering Muse. It just came out, I bought it on day one because I'm a huge fan, and I loved it. Again, I've done a video on it you can go check out. I make a lot of videos. This is set in the 19th century, as all her books are, and it's set in a West End theatre. Our protagonist has been brought in to be the dresser for an upcoming, supposedly fresh new actor who's going to blow the world wide open. She's the next big thing. And our protagonist, Jenny, is going to organise her costumes and repair them if they need to be repaired, etc., etc. But she's also been hired to spy on this actor by the wife of the man who owns the theatre. She has reason to believe that Lilith, the actor, isn't to be trusted. I'll leave it there. Go check out my video. But this is a really amazing Gothic novel set in a theatre, and it's about Greek mythology to a point and curses. It's pretty wild and very intimate, very claustrophobic, very gothic. Loved it. I have nothing to say about this one. This is God Killer by Hannah Kana. It's a new fantasy novel, and it kind of made me realize that I just don't care about fantasy anymore. I bought it for two reasons. One, it probably has the prettiest cover I've ever seen on a book ever, and the end papers are gorgeous too. And the other reason is that it's inspired by mythology. Rather than being a big fantasy epic, it's a slightly smaller fantasy novel inspired by world mythology, and so that really sounded great. But I got pretty bored. I just kind of wandered through it till I got to the end. It was really hard to care. I don't even remember it now. I also read a manga that I'll quickly mention called Skip and Loafer. It's a really, really charming shoujo pseudo-romance maybe manga, but it's about a country girl who moves to Tokyo to start middle school or high school, I can't remember. And she's quirky and strange and a bit of an outsider, but she's clever, and it's all about her building friendships and relationships, specifically with this adorable himbo. It's great. Skip and Loafer is absolutely adorable, beautifully written, and I'm going to keep reading it, I think. I really enjoyed it. And then at the very end, I'm just going to tease this. I think I'm back into comics after years of not reading any, and this is what got me back into comics, because it's about gay Superman. This is an amazing new Superman comic by Tom Taylor, drawn by John Timms, and it's about Superman's son, who is bisexual. And this is a comic that fully understands Superman. I am definitely going to make a full video on this soon, so I don't want to say too much, but wow, Superman, son of Kal-El, really gets the concept of Superman. After years of terrible, terrible DC films, made by Zack Snyder, a hack film director who does not understand the DC universe, does not understand Superman specifically. I hate that man, I hate his films. He does so much damage to great properties like Watchmen and Superman. And here we have a comic by a writer who fully understands the soul of Superman. I don't know if you can tell, but I am a huge Superman fan. I hate the concept that he's overpowered and therefore boring. It's not true. And I'll talk about it more in a full video, but I love Superman, and this is wonderful. It's a very, very politically progressive book, not just because Superman's son is bisexual, but because it tackles really big themes. At the beginning of the comic, John Kent, the new Superman, asks his dad why he hasn't done more. He can do anything. Why hasn't he fixed the world politically? And it's a really, really beautiful discussion. And it makes you wonder if Superman's future is extremely bright, and I think it is. So I'm going to mention a lot more in a full video about this very soon, but Superman, Son of Kal-El is an amazing comic book, and I can't stop saying it. It understands Superman. The goodness of him, his philosophy, his ethos. It's beautiful. Okay. That's everything I read in February. I had a really, really, really fun reading month. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I would love some new patrons. I'd love your support on Patreon. I really need it because, as I often say, YouTube doesn't actually pay that well, like at all. And it's only thanks to my patrons and the support that they give me that I make videos at all. If my Patreon disappeared tomorrow, I would probably stop making videos. I love my patrons, and there are so many great benefits, so support me on Patreon if you like, and subscribe for books.